Hello and welcome, biology students. Today we are going to learn about cladograms. Cladograms are a way to visually look at how things are related to each other and the evolutionary history of the different species. So cladograms look like a branching tree limb, and there's two different types of cladograms that I want you to know that they exist, but they basically start with the same. They put the oldest ancestors down at the bottom, and then the present day species branch off from there. And so we're going to deal with this type of cladogram today as I show you how to read it. So the purpose of a cladogram is to really look at common ancestry and how things have changed over time. So when you're looking at a cladogram, the current species are listed up at the top, and the traits are listed along the side. And so the oldest features that were around would be down at the bottom here. So we can see that the first trait that we're looking at is vertebrae. And what we're saying is that the salmon have vertebrae, and so do everything that's above it. And so there's a common ancestor right here. Wherever two of these lines join together, that is where a common ancestor was. And we had something branching off of here, which had salmon have different traits than the things that are coming after it. I kind of misspoke backwards there. Salmon have the traits in common with everybody, and everything branching above have traits in addition to having vertebrae. So let's look at the next trait that arrived on the evolutionary time scale. All of a sudden, we had mutations and lungs were created. And so instead of having gills, we now have lungs. And what this is saying is that anything above that trait being presented, all the creatures have that trait. So salamanders have lungs, lizards have lungs, hamsters, and chimpanzees. Then there was a common ancestor right here that branched off where salamanders went this way and other creatures went that way, and there were some changes, and all of a sudden now we have claws or nails. So what this is saying is that salamanders have little pads on their feet, and lizards have claws or nails. Hamsters have claws, chimpanzees have nails, because they are above that trait. So the next one that lizards do not have are fur and mammary glands. Hamsters have them because they are above the trait, and so do chimpanzees. What makes hamsters different from chimpanzees is the trait of opposable thumbs. And so that's how you go about reading a cladogram. So looking at this, who is the common ancestor for the lizard and the chimpanzee? So there's a creature that gave rise to both of them. Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Or is it D? Well, how you tell are where these two creatures intersect. So you'd follow the lizard down, there was an ancestor there, you follow the chimpanzee down, and so letter C is representing that common ancestor. The next thing that I want to do is to show you how we go about creating these. And so I'm going to pause this for a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the traits and figure out which organisms, which species have those traits. And we're just going to put a check mark in the box to indicate whether or not they have them. So rhino, hair and feathers, you bet. Frog, nope. Owl has feathers, fish do not. So we're going to put a 2 in this box because 2 of the species had it. Legs, rhinos do, frogs do. Owls do, fish do not. So we're going to put a 3 in here. Lungs, rhinos for sure, Frogs, yes. Owls, yes. Fish do not. They have gills. So now we're putting a 3 in here as well. Giving live birth. Rhinos do. Frogs do not. Frogs lay their eggs and spread the sperm in water. Owls lay eggs, not live birth. And fish lay eggs in water and distribute the sperm over them. So we're going to get 2 creatures that have live birth. And then we're going to look at the trait of a backbone. Rhinos have one, frogs have one, owls have one, and fish have one. So we'll give this a 4. So now we've just looked at what kind of traits these individuals have, and now we're going to do an exercise to try to make sense of this visually. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create these concentric circles. The outside of this circle, we're going to look at the trait that is shared by all the animals. So all the animals have a backbone. And then we're going to drag into the circle the species that only has those characteristics. So if you look at the fish, that is the only characteristic that the fish has in common with all the other creatures. So then we're going to do the same thing with the next trait, and we're going to pick the legs because they have a 3, which means that a lot of the creatures, 3 out of the 4 actually have this in common. And so when you look at legs and lungs, you're going to see that the creatures that only have legs and lungs in common are going to be the frogs. So we have the frog having the backbone like the fish, and then having the lungs and legs. But they don't give live birth and they don't have hair or feathers. So we'll drag the frog right there. Now we're going to look at the next trait, and the next trait that the organism that has both the backbone, has legs and lungs, but then has a trait that the other creature, or that only that creature has. So when we're looking at the owl has the backbone, it has the lungs, it has the legs, but now we get a new trait, hair and feathers. And so you write the species that only has that set of characteristics, that's going to be the owl. So now we're saying that the owl has feathers, but it also has the legs and lungs, and it has a backbone. Then the last trait is live birth, and you can see the rhino is the only one that has live birth. So then we're going to put the rhino in the center. So why we did that is just to analyze what do these things have in common and what order did they come in. And so now we have the information to put it on this tree. And so what we're going to do, remember we put the traits along here. So we determined that the trait that only the fish had was the backbone. So we're going to put the backbone as the first trait, and then we're going to put the fish up here because the fish had the backbone, and then we say that anything that's above it also has a backbone. So that's going to cover all of these organisms. Then the next trait that only was occurring in the frog was the legs and the lungs. So we put the legs and the lungs there, and then the frog here. So this is now saying that because this trait is located right here, the fish does not have that trait, but the frog and everything above it does. Then we're going to look at the next trait that we came up with, and that was hair and feathers. Hair and feathers were not shared by the frog or the fish, but now the owl does have hair and feathers. So this is saying anything above, the owl included, has hair and feathers. And then this trait arose, which is live birth. And the only species that gives live birth in this example was the rhino. So that's how we analyze what the traits are and how these relationships happen. So we're going to be doing a dissection project coming up, and you are going to be required to analyze some of these cladograms. And so I hope this will help you with that in the future.